Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Ayehu webinar, where we'll be demonstrating the new advanced features in our latest release of NG version 1.6. This release brings with it capabilities that will significantly expand what you can integrate with. It's going to simplify the process of moving workflows to production, and there's a host of other improvements that will make NG even better than it was before. My name is Guy Nadivi. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing for Ayehu, and I'm joined today by Mor Avital, Ayehu's Director of Product. And together, we'll be providing you a brief PowerPoint presentation about the new features in version 1.6, and then we'll be doing a deep dive to show you how it works and give you a sense of how it can add a lot more value to your IT environment. As usual, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions during the webinar, and we do encourage that, please submit them through your chat client on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try answering all of them during the Q&A portion of today's webinar right after the demo. Whoops, went ahead too quick. A quick few words about Ayehu for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We were founded 13 years ago in 2007, and we released version 1 of our software over a decade ago in 2009. We're a global firm with offices in the Bay Area, Manhattan, and our R&D is run out of Israel. We've received a number of industry recognitions, and we've got a portfolio of over 220 clients comprised of some of the biggest and best known enterprises in the world. These organizations typically have very large and or very complex environments, and they're using the Ayehu automation platform to automate many aspects of their operation. So if you're an existing user of Ayehu NG, or even if you're just thinking about trying us on for size, you probably know that one of the core strengths of our solution is how easy and quickly you can plug Ayehu into various ITSM platforms, cybersecurity tools, operating systems, messaging and notification solutions, and increasingly chatbots and AI services. And almost all of these integrations can be activated seamlessly without writing a single line of code. And the purpose of providing you with all these pre-built integrations and connectors that make up our ever-expanding ecosystem is to simplify your ability to orchestrate automation across any platform in your environment, all from a single pane of glass. And we're adding new integrations and their accompanying activities to Ayehu on an ongoing basis. But sometimes that hasn't been quick enough for some of our customers and prospects. So in our latest release of NG version, or I'm sorry, in our last release of NG version 1.5, we introduced you to its new activity designer. This new functionality allowed you to build your own activities from scratch in Python, C#, or .NET. And many of our customers use the activity designer to create activities for actions against external systems that we don't currently connect to. For example, you can use it to connect to Dropbox, Google, or any other third-party system that has accessible APIs. In this new version 1.6 of NG, we've added a software development kit. And this new SDK means that now, in addition to being able to build custom activities, you can build entire custom integrations. So if you'd like to integrate Ayehu with a platform we don't currently have an integration with, you can just do it yourself. And this might be especially helpful if you've got a homegrown application that's the only one of its kind, and you want to automate certain tasks for it. You can do that with the new SDK and orchestrate the workflows from right inside Ayehu NG, just like you do for your other platforms. In the past, migrating an NG workflow from a pre-production environment like dev or test was a bit challenging. In release 1.6, though, it becomes a breeze with our new NG to NG migration tool. And this tool makes moving workflows from a dev or test environment much simpler because it brings over almost all the entities associated with that workflow into your production environment. By the way, this comprehensive migration can be done on a single workflow or an entire folder of workflows. Many of you have been taking advantage of Ayehu's integration with Slack to build intelligent bots, which provide your end users with powerful self-service remediation capabilities. And that's probably eased the strain quite a bit on your service desks. In version 1.6, we've greatly simplified the process of configuring a Slack bot to just one click. On top of that, we've also activated an Add to Slack button on our Slack integration page so you can easily register your bot with Slack. Ayehu NG version 1.6 now has enhanced security for configuring default password policy. This means that passwords for all new accounts will be much stronger. You can now set your own default password strength and parameters based on your organization's security needs. So if your password standard requires 12 characters, 2 special characters, and a number, you can now set this as default, and it will be enforced across all local accounts in your environment. If you prefer syncing accounts from your Active Directory, then NG will default instead to the password policies you've established in AD. Another improvement NG version 1.6 introduces is an updated installer, which simplifies installation while also providing greater visibility into the installation process. So in the image you see here, you can review all the components to be installed on a component selection tree. All the most popular components are selected by default, but you can easily toggle the ones you don't want. And we've also added a prerequisite screen check to ensure that the installation will complete successfully and to let you know if any minimum installation requirements are lacking. This new feature is more about aesthetics than anything else, but we've refreshed the login page with a bit more of a dynamic look and feel to it. And finally, this newest release of NG includes an integration for BMC's Helix Remedy Force. It's basically a duplicate of the existing BMC Remedy Force integration capabilities, but it's on BMC's Helix platform. And this new integration allows you to create, update, and get records from Helix Remedy Force, as well as execute SOQL queries. Okay, I've kept today's PowerPoint presentation shorter than usual because we want to maximize the time you get to see these cool new features. But before we move into the live demo portion of today's webinar, we want to take a quick poll. And so Michal, if you could go ahead and post that. All right, so if you could please take a moment to answer the question, what is the most useful new feature of NG version 1.6? Tell us what you think. Is it the SDK, the NG to NG migration tool, improved Slackbot capabilities, configurable password policy, or the updated installer? Take a moment and give us your feedback, and we'll flash the results momentarily. Okay, we should have just about everybody's results, and we're going to show you what they are. And well, no surprise, it looks like more than half of you think that the most useful new feature is the SDK, which kind of confirms our suspicions that there's a lot of things out there that people would like to integrate with Ayehu and G, and they want to do it on their own. So that's great to know. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking that poll. And we're now done with the presentation portion of today's webinar. So that means it's time to move on to the demo and show you the cool new v1.6 features just discussed. In order to do that, we'll switch over to our Director of Product, Mor Avital, and she'll be driving from here. Mor, take it away.
Thanks, everybody. Let me just share my screen, and we can get started. Let me know when you see it. So what I want to show you today first is the new installation process. The reason we updated the installer was we wanted to really simplify it to make it as clear as possible what you were doing and the steps you would need to take to get there. So everything from if you're choosing a single tenant or a multi-tenant installation to are you doing a brand new installation or upgrading your version after you uninstall the previous version, or you're adding components to something existing, you wanted to add an integration to an existing tenant. All of that is now much simplified. So you'll run the installer. You guys can, Guy, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you'll run the installer. You'll see we even updated the picture to match what's on our new login page. You'll get the new installation. You can click through it, accept the EULA. This is typical. Choose where you want to install it. Here's where the changes start. So the first one is really we simplified a single tenant and multi-tenant. So that's the first selection you make. A single tenant is our typical installation. That's the one 99% of the customers will use. Multi-tenant is still behind installation key. So you would have to talk to your support or sales representative to get that installation key, and then we'll help you also with the multi-tenant installation just because of the configurations after. We'll choose single tenant here. And then you choose what kind of installation you're doing. So is this a new NG tenant, or you upgrade it after uninstalling a previous version? This is adding components to something that's already existing on the same version, or installing a standalone components, like if you have something in a DMZ environment that you want to install but that has no database access, this is the option that you choose. So we're creating a new instance today. You'll see here that the core components, the ones that are required to run the system, are selected by default. And everything else is either not selected, or you'll see we have them under our integration pack. So we've moved some of the integrations around to all be under the integration packs. And there are some that are selected by default: Ayehu Brain, CMD, email, ServiceNow, Jira. The ones that we know most of our customers are using, those are all selected by default. But you can make any changes you want, right? So if I want to install Tivoli, but I don't want to install Jira, you can make those changes. In this case, I do want to install Jira and I don't want Tivoli, so I'll change them back. There's an explanation of each one on the right. You can connect, you can choose, if you don't have a database already set up for this, you can install SQL Express 2012. This is only supported for trial installation. So if you want to run a trial of NG, you want to see what it's like, but you don't have a dedicated database for it yet, you can have us install SQL Express, but it's not supported for a production environment. In this case, I have one. 182, and I use my SA authentication. And because this is a demo, I'm sure it will fail because it's what it always does. But we'll go forward. Nah, I told you. Just 1 second. Let's try that again. I think I have the wrong credentials. There we go. It's just the same. In case you want to do a different authentication here, you can do it. And I'm connecting to the database. And what it'll do is, based on the components that you chose to install, so self-service, for example, will have different components that's necessary. Web service will have different components that's necessary, versus I'm just installing ServiceNow integration somewhere. We'll check based on what you are wanting to install, the computer that you're installing on, the Chrome version that you have, the IIS features that you have, the SQL server that you're installing on, the amount of space and RAM you have available. So in this case, we're saying this is a warning that the recommended for a production environment is 16 gigabytes. I only have 7, but that's sufficient for a trial. For the purposes of this demonstration, that's enough. Anything that's checked with a green check is everything's perfectly fine. Anything that's this with the exclamation mark is a warning. So this won't stop me because it's supported for a trial installation. But if it was, let's just, for example, an unsupported version, if I was using an unsupported version of a SQL server, it would stop me and I wouldn't be able to go forward with this. So it'll do checks on everything that we need. It will show you what the required version is, and if you don't have it, see, in this case, it's telling me what I have. If you don't have it, it'll tell you what you have. If there are things that you can change, for example, IIS features, you can go into your IIS and just check the right features and then click retry. So you don't have to stop the installation process and start again. Just click retry, we'll recheck them and make sure you've changed it. For things like, you have the wrong, not enough disk space or something like that requires a restart anyway, you'll have to stop here. It'll say close. You have to close out of the installation, make the necessary changes and start again. In this case, we're fine. We just have a warning that's not relevant for this purpose. So we'll continue. And we install. Now, another thing that we added here is the ability to have a Chrome bookmark put on your desktop that will automatically launch the browser for you with your login page, and the ability to open it automatically. So a lot of times what we saw happen was a customer would install NG and then go, well, now what? Where do I go? I don't know where to log in. It's your first time using the system. It's not really clear where you're going. And so we'll automatically open it for you. and then you can start the registration process. And I'll talk while this is doing its installation, we'll talk a little bit about the registration process. So one of the things that we heard back from customers as feedback when they are doing the initial registration is that we put in a default admin user. And the default admin user wasn't always clear what it was because we're the ones who created it automatically. And so you didn't know where to log in or how. And it wasn't the most secure because it didn't fit your password policy standards for your organization. And so what we've done is instead of automatically creating that first super admin, the one that has complete control in your system, we don't automatically create that as the admin user anymore. We'll give you during your first time installation, so first time installation only, if this user does not already exist, we'll give you the option or the ability, it's required, to create that user based on the standards that you want. So you can choose your password. It's based on the default password policy that we have. You can always change it later when it's configurable, as Guy mentioned, but you'll do it once. So here you'll see we've completed the installation. I can choose to launch Ayehu ng and create a desktop shortcut. You can also show the installer logs if you want. I'll finish, and it will open it for me. Don't worry about this. This is only because this is our internal environment. And so the very first time anyone logs in, if we don't have that super admin account already created, you'll get the registration page. The first time takes a little bit because what it's doing is it's checking to make sure if we have that registration user or not. And if not, you'll see a registration page in just a moment. And you'll enter the credentials for that user, and then you'll be presented with the login screen. The benefit here is that admin user is completely under your control in terms of what the credentials are. And then we also take this opportunity to define the company name that you are going to be logging in with. So you put in their first name, last name, username, email address, password, company name. In that username and company name are the ones you used to log in with too. Sorry, this is a remote desktop, and so it's taking a long time. And you'll see it in just a moment, hopefully. Why don't I do something else while we're waiting for this? We can start showing you the migration process. 1 second. Okay, so while we're waiting for that first time registration, after you register the first time, of course, if this is a brand new installation, you'll need to apply for a license. However, if you're also upgrading from a different version of NG to 1.6, because of the way that we've made some changes in the system, you will have to get a new license. So if you're working on an upgrade and you know when your upgrade timing will be, make sure you can coordinate with support to make sure we have someone online to give you a new license. You provide them with a product key, and they'll give you a new license. Still working on that. Okay, so we'll do, while we're waiting for the server, we'll do migration. Okay, so I assume a lot of you are familiar with the iShare to NG migration, which we've had for a while, which allowed you to take workflows out of iShare, connect to your iShare database, export workflows out of that database, and build them into NG. The benefit of using that export tool for the iShare to NG migration was that you wouldn't have to rebuild the wheel every time. So you would bring the workflow itself, the XML with all the activities, as well as anything, most of the entities that were associated with that workflow. So accounts and devices and templates and error handlers and conditions and everything else that was built into that workflow that really made it work beyond just the activities would be automatically built into the system for you. And it's been very successful with our customers, the ones who have been doing the migration. This has been helpful in having them, helping them do this without having to recreate everything. It reduces the load on that, but something close to 90%, I think. And then the next logical step was the NG to NG migration. So in this case, it's not so much a wholesale migration. It's more of I created a workflow in my dev environment and I tested it in my dev environment, and now I want to move it into my production environment. But it has the same accounts associated with it, the same devices, the same conditions. I don't want to recreate all of those in NG, so it makes sense in my production environment. So it makes sense then that we would bring all those entities along with that workflow. So exporting a workflow is simple. I'm sure you've seen it before. we're actually going to import from here. If you used NG before, I'm sure you've seen how to export, but I'll show you in a second. We're actually doing import. So you can import from the workflow designer or from the workflow repository. Workflow repositories are from workflow repository. We'll do it from the designer. One thing to remember is when you import from the workflow designer, it will automatically be put in the workflows folder, and it will automatically open in a tab on the designer. So if you are looking to import 20 workflows at once, do it from the repository, not from the designer. But for one at a time, which is what we're doing, or I think there's 4 in here, we'll choose this. So we'll choose the workflow we want to import, the zip folder. Now it'll go through a process where it validates the XML. It will check the modules that we're importing. You have to have those modules configured first so that we can make the appropriate associations. And then we'll do conflict management. So what this is saying is you already have a device with this IP. Would you like to use the existing device in the source system, in the destination system, which is the one in your ng pod environment for the sake of this example? Or would you like to keep both devices, because even though in this case they have the same IP, but they have different meanings, you want to be able to associate existing workflows with the old one and this new workflow with the new one, and then it'll create another one for you. What we don't have yet and is in the works right now is the overwrite function, which means I want to overwrite what's existing in this destination system with what's coming from the source system. So I'll overwrite all the information that's existing in that in the configuration for this device and overwrite it with the information I'm importing. You can do this for all of the conflicts. You can do this conflict management one at a time, where you can say, do everything for this. Click next. If you had other types of conflicts, it would do that. You'll go through that conflict management screen for each type of conflict, except for the workflow itself is never a conflict. The workflows at the parent workflow level are always created new. It'll tell you how many workflows were imported successfully. If there are any that failed, you will get a log of what failed. You click OK, and that workflow will open here. And that workflow will come with it, with all of the settings and the passwords and everything that was already in these activities, everything that was associated with it. This device has been created for me. The users, if there are any, have been created for me. All of that is already in there, and I've done all the conflict management. A couple of key things to remember. Because of the complexity of triggers and schedulers, we do not import those. Those will have to be either created manually when you're doing an NG to NG migration, or you have to go in and associate this workflow with a condition and a trigger and a scheduler that already exists. It's just because of the sensitive nature of those and the complexity of those, the room for error there in importing them was very, very great. So we decided that it would be in the best interest of our customers if we let you handle that manually. So that is the migration feature. While we're here, we'll talk about, you'll see there's a new Helix Remedy Force integration, which mirrors our existing BMC Remedy Force integration, but on the BMC's new Helix platform. This is managed by a license, so you have to have a license for this integration, and then you can use it. So I think that covers the Helix Remedy Force, the import, export. Oh, I told you I would show you how to export a workflow. So easiest way to export a workflow is to go to the repository, and you can choose either an entire folder and export that folder, or you can just choose a single workflow and export that workflow. And when you export it, it will show you, oh, this one's not valid. Yeah. Export the workflow. There you go, and it'll export it for you as the XML. A nice thing to see here, one second, I'll show you this. As part of the export, you'll see what is the export of the XML itself, and we also have an export summary. So in this case, there's just one workflow, but if there was more than one, oh, it's going to tell me that I can't open it now. Here we go. You'll see a summary of the success of each workflow. If you couldn't export it for some reason, there's very few reasons why a workflow can be exported, but it does happen occasionally. If you had multiple workflows here, you'll see in the XML structure the name of the workflow, and if it was successfully exported, and if not, the name of the error and the reason why it wasn't exported. So if you ever have issues when you're importing a workflow, this is a very handy log to look at to see if there was perhaps an issue when you were exporting that workflow, and that's what's caused the problem. All of this is documented in our support community under the NG to NG workflow migration, so I encourage you to take a look at that and see everything that you need to see about that. Let's see if our registration page came up. There you go. Just took a while on the remote server. So if you'll recall, we did the installation. We automatically opened the first page. We launched it in the browser. And now I'm going to define this first system admin user. Now, it's very important to remember that this is going to be your super admin account. This is the account that has access to everything in your system. This is an account that you're not going to want to delete. This is a local account only. And I'm going to choose a password. And the password complexity is listed here. This is the default password complexity that comes with an installation of Ayehu, of NG. After you install, you can change that configuration complexity to whatever you want it to be. And the documentation for that is also in our community. I am going to do this again and hope I did the right password twice. Create the account. And the company name. If your passwords didn't match the password complexity or didn't match each other, it'll prompt you and let you know. And now when you're reaching this page, you know exactly what you need to do to log in. Whereas before, the first time, you didn't necessarily know what your username and password was. You certainly didn't know what your company was because you hadn't defined it anywhere. And now you'll be able to log in. I'm logging into a system that's never been used before, so the first thing I'll see is the license details page. But even for installations that already exist, what you need to do is go to the license details page, take this product key, and start a support case for it. So they'll give you a new license, because for 1.6, you're going to need a new license even for existing customers. Okay, so that was a lot of the setup stuff. And now I want to talk about what the majority of you said was interesting to you and is really, really interesting to us too. I want to talk about the SDK. So like Guy was saying before, one of the things, unfortunately, I don't have anything fancy to show for the SDK. We can talk a little bit about the activity designer for those of you who haven't seen it yet, how it fits in. So let me pull that back up. So we've had the activity designer since 1.5. We have a GitHub community that has custom activities. I think we have upwards of 200 custom activities in that right now. And what the activity designer does is give you the ability to create any activity to any external system that has available or accessible APIs and use that activity as an activity in our system. We've seen activities for Google, Dropbox, Box, Azure, AWS, all sorts of file systems. So we've seen them for legacy systems that nobody else is ever going to create an integration for, but is super critical for your organization. You can create an activity. Activities are great for a one-time action against an external system. I want to create a folder. I want to delete a file. I want to manage a user account, anything like that. What activities don't give you are things that come with a module. So listeners and forms and the ability to filter, the ability to pull in alerts. So if you think about, for example, our ServiceNow integration, you can set that ServiceNow integration to listen to particular forms in ServiceNow. And every 10, 20, 30 seconds, pull in new tickets that were relevant based on the forms and filters that you set up and do appropriate things in the system for them. All of this was not possible through an activity, but is possible through a full integration. So what the SDK does, and it's available through a separate installer that you can get, just start a support case for it, we'll be happy to get it for you, is create your own integration. And the SDK comes with examples and a project and documentation and anything that you need to really get started, even with a simple hello world integration, just so you can get the feel for it and then start building your own. Whether it be a single form integration like Tivoli and SolarWinds that are alerting, so they don't necessarily have projects like Jira or forms like ServiceNow, but you do want to get alerts based on filters of what's critical for you. to a multi-form integration like Jira, where you want to be able to configure different forms to go to reach out to different projects, pull in information based on criteria you decide. All of that is now possible through the SDK. You'll create an integration with our examples in the project, with our documentation, and then you'll be able to insert that into NG, and it will show up like any other integration under our modules. So once you insert it, you will see it here listed under the integrations, and then you can configure it. You can configure it just like any other integration that we have. So in this case, I don't have a custom integration on this server, but you will see whatever parameters you defined for your system. Sometimes it's URL, email, and password, or a token. Sometimes it's username, password, and a host, like a device and a port. Whatever is relevant for your integration. As you defined it in the SDK, you would see it here. You'd create that connection. And then you will see those activities in the activity designer as well. So if there are activities that are associated with that integration, and for the most part, we assume that there will be an activity associated with an integration, you'll see it in the activity designer in a new category based on the same name that you gave your integration. And those activities will be here under that folder, under that category. You'll be able to see them here. And then the code for those activities is actually managed by the SDK, by the integration itself, by the module itself, but you can do other manipulation here if you want. And of course, once they're in the system, you'll also be able to see them in the workflow designer under the appropriate thing. And you can see, for example, what a custom activity looks like in our workflow designer. Whatever you wanted to have here, these will be defined by your SDK, by the code that you write for this integration as well. So this is really fantastic for customers who have specific legacy systems that they were using internally, but that no one has like a full integration with. This is the way to create that. Or you want to use an integration with a third-party software that we don't have, or one that's very important to you, or you want to do something a little bit different. This is the way for you to do that without having to wait on our development timeline, and really do the things that fit specific to your needs. I mean, we've heard this from some customers where they want something that we don't have, and that isn't close enough on our roadmap to address their needs, or they want something to work a little bit differently. So they use custom activities, and they will use the SDK to really fit those needs for them. That was a lot of talking all at once. The configure password policy we talked about. The only other thing I think we should talk about is the Slack bot. So we've had a Slack integration for quite a while. Fantastic for making your IT processes more accessible to your users. So instead of having to submit a ticket or call help desk for resetting their passwords, for example, they can use the Slack bot to start that process themselves. So they'll trigger the conversation with the Slack bot. They'll say, I want to reset my password. And that message, that conversation will trigger the appropriate workflow in NG based on the parameters that you defined. And it'll trigger the workflow reset for resetting a password. We'll send the right information, the right message to that user. They'll send it back to us, whatever it is they need to reset the password. And that's how you use the Slack integration to get what you need to make it more accessible to your users. Up until this point, though, you've had to define the Slack bot yourself, and there's documentation on how to do that. And of course, you can still do that if that's what you want. But now you can see it. There's an Add to Slack button. I won't do it because I'm logged in, and we already have it on our system, so you won't be able to do it here. So you can add to Slack from here, and all you have to put is your callback URL. We'll register. We'll give you the tokens that you need to register your system. And then you also find us in the Slack app directory. I always forget the URL. So you can search for us. If you search for Ayehu, you'll see we have our Slack bot in here. And here you can start that process as well. Only administrators, workspace administrators can install the Slack bot because that's something we want everybody to do, but we do want to make this much more accessible. So this removes the need for you to have to do this yourself, to have to define that Slack bot yourself. Okay, I think I'm done. Guy, did I miss anything?
I think you pretty much covered the highlights, more.
All right, that was a lot of talking. So now I definitely want to open it up for questions. If there's anything that you want to learn more about, I'd be happy to answer or show you.
Okay.
Let's see. I have a really hard time seeing the questions on here. It's very small.
Oh, I've got them up in front of my screen. So let me go ahead and bring them up. And thank you, Moore. And now we come to the Q&A portion of today's webinar. As mentioned earlier, if you've got any questions, please submit them through your chat client on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try our best to answer all of them. And I see that a number of you have located the panel because we've got quite a few questions, which is great. So let's go ahead and dive in. First question, does the NG to NG migration also migrate external development code? Say we have created a Python code and are using it in workflow using the Python code activity.
Yes, so what you're talking about, if I remember correctly, is here is external development and you've made a development object. Then yes, it will export this too and import it into the NG environment, your destination environment. It matches based on name. So if you have something that has the same name, it'll find that as a conflict and you'll be asked to manage that.
Okay, next question. Company name is the database name given during installation, isn't it?
So the database name, it remains the same. The company name is actually decoupled from that. It's been decoupled from that for a while, just so nobody would really use it like that. So in this case, it doesn't have to be the database name. So you can set a different company name. You can continue to use the database name if you wanted. So you saw my database was named Ayehu, and I named the company Ayehu, and it was the same thing. But this wasn't as clear to a lot of users. So the fact that you know that the database name is the company name is something that most users actually don't. And we wanted to give them the ability to make that more accessible and more user-friendly. So we made that decoupling more evident in the UI. You can continue to do it that way if that fits your naming structure, of course, but you can also have some more flexibility.
Next question. Is it possible to move workflows from NG 1.4 to 1.5 to the new 1.6 version as easy as you indicated?
Unfortunately not. Some of this is part of the export, and that export that you saw that I exported from NG was built for 1.6. You can still do an export from 1.4, 1.5, and into 1.6, but it won't have all of the entities with it. It will just have the structure. It might have a few other things that are in the XML and that we can get in the import, but it's not the full solution that you saw here today.
Okay, I think this next question is similar, but I'll ask it anyways. Is Ayehu NG to NG mandatory to use the export with the new version, or can we import from previous versions and export in the new one?
Yes, I think that's the same question. You can still continue to export from a previous version and do it. It won't be the full experience though.
All right. Next question. Is the Ayehu SDK a licensed version? Are there any limitations with the number of custom activities you can create?
Oh, excellent question. I meant to address that. So yes, the SDK itself is a license, and I believe you license by number of custom integrations you wish to create. The activities themselves at this point are not licensed. You can have as many activities as you want per integration.
Okay. Kind of a related question. Why do we need the SDK if we have the activity designer?
So the activity designer is great for single point actions against an external source. I want to create a file. I want to update a user profile. I want to delete a folder. Not as great for anything that requires first an external input into the system. So if a new ticket is created elsewhere in your ITSM, in your Jira or ServiceNow or what have you, you won't be able to get that into NG using an activity, not automatically anyway. So you'd have to run the activity to make it happen, to bring it back if you could, to get a response. What the integration, the SDK does is allow you to create a full integration with a listener that will pull the external integration however many seconds you define. and pull in any events. And you can also filter those events. So if I'm interested only in tickets that are severity critical or major, then I can do that through the filter that I define for that form in that integration. All of that part of the filtering, the scheduling, the polling, the getting of external alerts, all of that is not possible through an activity. Activities are still great in their own right and coupled along with an integration, but this gives you kind of that full picture.
Here's a question about the client installation. What is the client installing in the installation package where 3 files are present? Ayehu and G, SDK, and client.
Somebody saw my file. Let me see if I can pull it up again. Yeah, so clients is a CMD, and so the command prompt for ng and ngio, ngim. SDK is what you need to run the SDK, so it comes with the documentation and the project and the templates and everything else that you need. You do need to have Visual Basic for the SDK. We do not bring Visual Basic with us, so you need to have Visual Basic installed on your machine for that. And the ngio, ng is the installer that we ran today.
Okay, this question is similar to a previous one, but it's being asked in a different way, so I'll bring it up anyways. Is the SDK part of the current license, or do we need a separate license?
You do need an additional license, so it's like you would be licensing another integration, except or if you wanted, 5 more executors, or in this case, you're licensing for the number of custom integrations you wish to create.
Next question. Any plans for bringing in Internet Explorer in addition to Chrome?
Unfortunately, not right now. Not for lack of wanting, just because of the way that it's set up and the support that it provides. It's not something that we can support right now. But we continue to check into it every once in a while and see if we can make improvements, and they've made improvements that we can work with to make it possible. However, if that's something that is critical to you, I would highly recommend that you go to our support community, and there's a product feedback or a feature section where you can make requests, and I follow those. And so if you tell me that you want Internet Explorer and 50 other customers tell me that they want Internet Explorer, that helps me build a business case for making it a more critical need. So for anything like that, that's something that you want that we don't currently have, other than integrations, in which case you're welcome to create them yourself. You should please give us that feedback in the support community so I can follow and track that.
Next question, this is an interesting one. I've made changes to the workflow in dev, which is already implemented in production. So will migrating the workflow now to production overwrite the existing workflow?
It will not. It will create a new one. So if you have 2 workflows named delete folder, for example, or I don't know what you call it, reset VM, then it will create a new workflow called reset VM _ imported. What you're asking for, and very legitimately asking for, is the overwrite feature. And that's something that's in development right now, which is, I've already done the initial migration. So now this first workflow is already in my production environment. I've gone back and made some changes in my dev environment. I want to take those changes and bring them into my production environment. And that's the overwrite feature. And that's going to be currently planned for 1.7, which is then we'll say, okay, this workflow already exists in your production environment. Do you want to override it with the changes that you're importing? And then it will take everything that you did from your dev and bring it into your prod environment and overwrite the existing one.
Okay, and speaking of migrations, here's another question on that topic. Has the migration from iShare to NG changed?
The migration from iShare to NG has added a few things. Again, only if you're importing into 1.6. If you're importing into 1.5, it stays the same because the changes that we made were actually on the import side. Migrating from iShare to 1.6 will now bring with it permissions, conditions, and triggers. Conditions and triggers have a caveat that we'll only do it the first time. So as opposed to doing the NG to NG migration where I said conditions and schedulers, not conditions and triggers. Conditions and schedulers will only be imported with the iShare to NG. And in contrast to the NG to NG migration, where if I bring a trigger, for example, from your dev environment to your pod environment, I stand to overwrite your existing trigger or create a new trigger, or make a really big mess from your triggers and conditions and everything that comes with it. We decided we're not going to do that. We're going to leave that as an exercise to you guys to do, to make sure that you have full control. So triggers and schedulers are not supported in the NG to NG migration. From iShare to NG, we assume that or in most cases what we've seen our customers do, is migrate from iShare to an NG dev environment where there's a little bit less risk. And it's also a one-time thing where you're not going to override or continue and create more triggers and schedules. And so we will bring triggers and schedules, at least the first time, and create them for you in your environment along with permissions. And so triggers, schedules, and permissions were not available before, but they are available for the 1.6 from iShare.
Here's an installation question. To upgrade to version 1.6, do we need to uninstall the existing version and then install the version 1.6 again?
Yes, sorry, I was reading the question again. So yes, you need to uninstall the existing version and install 1.6. The good news is that we understand that's a little bit of a cumbersome process. And so in the installation of 1.6, we're adding some keys that will let us know that this is a 1.6 version. And then when you want to upgrade from 1.6 to 1.7, the plan is to have it be an actual upgrade. You don't have to uninstall, reinstall. You run the new installer. We recognize you have 1.6. We do it all automatically for you, and you can be upgraded to 1.7 or 1.8. But it does require that you have upgrade at least to 1.6 first. So in this case, yes, if you're moving from 1.5 to 1.6, you have to uninstall 1.5 and then install 1.6. In the future, that will be much, much simpler.
Okay. Next question. How can we maintain the service account information securely in Ayehu NG, and then it has the words password vault in parentheses next to it?
So by service account information, I'm not sure if you're referring to the super admin that I created, in which case that's a local user as opposed to something that's like linked from your Active Directory. So all our passwords are encrypted. All our information is secure, of course. I don't know if this necessarily answers your question. I'm not sure if I understood it, but we do have integrations with CyberArk for password management and secure password storage. So I don't know if that's going to solve this particular issue, but that's something that you might want to look into.
All right, this next question I think I can answer myself. Can we get the recording for this session? And the answer is yes. Following today's webinar, everybody that attended will be receiving an email with links to watch the webinar recording on demand. Next question, will an installer that can do an in-place upgrade ever be created?
I think so. This relates to the previous question about upgrading, if you have to uninstall and reinstall. So yes, an installer that can do an in-place upgrade will be created from 1.6 forward. So if you already are on 1.6 and you want to upgrade to 1.7, it will be a much smoother upgrade process. You will not have to uninstall.
Okay, I'm sure that user will be very happy to hear that. Next question. Is the new version available or when will it be available? And also, is it possible to migrate from the previous versions to the new one? I think we've answered that. I tried to look for any limitation or incompatibility feature.
So the new version is available. It's on the website right now for a trial download if you want. You can just download it from our website. It's a trial download just if you're a new user. Of course, if you're an existing user and you want it, you can just download it if you're an existing customer. I will reiterate again that you do need a new license for this. So please ask their support rep for a new license to apply so that you can start working right away. But go to our website and download. Okay,
this next question, I think the answer is yes, but we'll ask anyways. Is there support for version 1.6?
So if you mean, is it available? Yes. And if you mean, like, can you put a support ticket for it and someone will help you? Yes. There's also, I've made a point of publishing a ton of documentation in our support community. So with the exception of the SDK, which has its own built-in documentation, and then I didn't publish anything for it. Everything that we covered today, from the migration to Helix Remedy Force to password configuration to a few other things that we didn't talk about, the Slack bot, everything like that, that's all published in the community, in the support community. So I highly recommend you take a look at those features if they're interesting to you. We've also made some changes for Office 365 and deleting emails that are found by NG. We've made some additional logging capabilities for account tracking that might be interesting to those of you who are in a more auditable environment. So please do take a look at the support community for this new documentation in support of 1.6.
And speaking of documentation, this next question is timely. Are release notes already available to read?
Yes, absolutely. If you go into the support community and look for NG 1.6 release notes, you'll get a PDF. I can show you even what it looks like because I'm looking at it right now. See, I'm still sharing my screen, right?
No, we're on my screen.
Oh, no, that's not mine. So sorry. So that's fine. Yeah, you can go to the support community and just search for release notes. There's also, and this might be useful for you, anyone who wants to track this along, in the support community, there's an available versions article, which lists all of the available versions of NG as they are released with their last version and their release date. And so you can always follow that page. So if there's any updates, whenever we release a new version, I update the release notes there, and that'll help you know that a new version is available and make the release notes available to you.
All right, this next question I believe you've answered, but we'll go ahead and ask it again just for comprehensiveness. Do we need to import the workflows again and create triggers after upgrading from 1.5 to 1.6?
So you need to import the workflows, yes, and I think what you're asking is, does the imported workflow have the triggers associated with it? So even when you're importing or migrating from 1.6 to 1.6, the triggers and the schedulers will not be imported. So yes, you'll have to either create them if they're brand new or associate existing triggers and schedulers with your workflow.
Okay, it looks like this is the last question. Any plans to build a custom password vault in Ayehu NG, and then in parentheses, domain service account to connect to target server?
So if we're talking about something like a CyberArk integration or a Beyond Trust integration or a HashiCorp integration, the integrations themselves, we have a couple of them, and the SDKs or even the activity designer is built for that. What we say for most accounts is that we highly, highly recommend that you synchronize with your AD accounts for all of that account management, because it allows you to stay in sync with your organizational policies for account management, do things like not just password configuration and strength, but history and time limits for how long before you have to reset a password and things like that. So I think that will get you what you need, but if not, then please let me know in the feedback.
Okay, actually a couple more questions have just come in. So real quickly, are there any changes in the existing activities when compared to 1.5?
Are there any changes in the existing activities? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, there's some new ones with BMC,
so
Helix
yes,
Remedy Force.
Exactly. So we've added some new ones for Helix Remedy Force. We've made some bug fixes to some of the activities, and those are available in the release notes, where I don't know all the bug fixes, but the vast majority of them that are interesting to customers are in there. If you have something that you're interested in and you're not sure if it was covered in the release, then either send us some feedback or ask in the support community. Open a support ticket and we'll get you an answer.
Okay, and this is definitely the last question. Does the version 1.6 product key change after every update?
You're asking if you have to get a new product key every time you do an upgrade. So no, this was a one-time thing based on some changes that we made. We don't foresee this being an ongoing. I can't say that it will never happen. Further down the road, there might be another change that we make that requires this, but this should not be part of the standard upgrade process. It's really just a one-time thing that we need.
All right, so that will conclude our Q&A session. If you think of anything else that you'd like to ask, my contact information is on your screen now. Please feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll make sure we get your questions answered promptly. As a next step, for those of you interested in test driving NG version 1.6 with all the cool new features Moore just demonstrated, please visit our website and download your very own free 30-day trial version that you can kick the tires on. If you have any sales questions about pricing for NG version 1.6, whether it's a new deployment or if you're interested in upgrading your existing license, please contact sales directly. Their email address is currently on your screen. And that concludes our webinar, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, as well as a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.